In a world drowning in distractions, the ability to focus has become rare and incredibly valuable. While others chase notifications and shallow success, a silent revolution is rising, one built on depth, discipline, and undeniable results. This is not just about working harder. It's about working smarter, deeper, and with intention. Welcome to Deep Work by Cal Newport, where your undivided attention becomes your greatest weapon. You're watching Thinknova, fuel for focused minds. In an age where the average attention span had begun to shrink, a silent war brewed beneath the surface of everyday routines. People opened laptops with good intentions but found themselves pulled into whirlpools of endless tabs and blinking notifications. They scrolled through feeds, skimmed headlines, responded to messages, and jumped between apps with restless urgency. The modern world celebrated connectivity but quietly devoured concentration. In this backdrop, the value of undistracted, focused effort became more precious than ever. A man named Cal Newport had watched the trends carefully. He observed how knowledge work, though intellectually demanding, was becoming fragmented. He saw professionals drifting through shallow waters of distraction while believing they were being productive. He understood that in the digital economy, where tools and platforms made everything seem urgent, the ability to focus deeply on a cognitively demanding task was becoming both rare and crucial. Newport called this ability deep work. He defined it as the capacity to focus without distraction on a cognitively demanding task. It was through this kind of work that people created new value, improved their skills rapidly, and produced at an elite level. But deep work came with a price. It required solitude, it required intentionality, and it demanded the rejection of the shallow attractions that define modern life. Deep work was the opposite of multitasking. It was the antidote to busy work. It was the skill that distinguished the truly productive from the endlessly occupied. As Newport studied those who thrived in their fields, authors, scientists, entrepreneurs, coders, he found a common thread. They all carved out long, uninterrupted hours to go deep. They protected these hours fiercely, and in doing so, they reaped rewards far beyond those who tried to keep up through scattered attention. To tell the story of deep work is to travel through disciplines, industries, and mindsets. It begins with the economic truth of the information age. Automation and globalization were reshaping the workforce. Routine tasks were being replaced by algorithms. Global competition meant only the best could rise above the noise. To thrive in this world, Newport explained, one needed two core abilities. First was the ability to master hard things quickly. Second was the ability to produce at an elite level in both quality and speed. Both these abilities, he argued, depended on deep work. But the culture was drifting in the opposite direction. Open office plans, constant email checking, social media updates, and meeting overload were diluting the capacity to go deep. The very structures of modern workplaces rewarded shallowness. People who answered emails fast were praised. Those who stayed connected were seen as team players. But none of this correlated with real productivity. The world was measuring activity, not impact. Newport knew that reclaiming deep work required more than motivation. It needed a philosophy. He proposed 4 different approaches to deep work, each suited to different personalities and professions. The first was the monastic approach. In this model, individuals removed themselves almost completely from the world of distraction. They created environments where they could dive deep for long periods. Writers, scholars, and researchers often followed this path. They retreated to cabins, isolated rooms, or libraries, surfacing only when their work was done. The second was the bimodal approach. This model involved dividing time between deep work and everything else. One might spend a few days in isolation, followed by days of connectivity and meetings. It offered a rhythm for those who couldn't abandon the world entirely, but still needed depth. The third was the rhythmic approach. Here, deep work was built into daily routines. For example, working deeply from 8 to 11 every morning like clockwork. It offered consistency and became a habit. The fourth was the journalistic approach. In this style, individuals seized deep work opportunities whenever they appeared, much like journalists diving into writing when a story broke. This required experience and confidence, as it lacked the structure of the other methods. But no matter the approach, the principle was the same. Depth must be protected. It was not something that happened automatically. It had to be planned, scheduled, and defended. Newport emphasized that willpower alone was not enough. Willpower was limited. If one tried to resist distractions all day, the mind would eventually give in. Instead, he advocated for rituals and routines. By designing environments and schedules that supported depth, individuals could make deep work a natural part of life. He shared stories of great minds who exemplified this. Carl Jung, the psychiatrist, had built a stone tower in the woods. There he worked deeply, away from his busy clinical practice. Bill Gates, during his time at Microsoft, regularly took think weeks, isolating himself with books and papers to strategize. J.K. Rowling, while finishing her final Harry Potter book, checked into a luxury hotel to escape the distractions of home. These people were not romanticizing solitude. They were using it. They were leveraging focus to create something remarkable. But deep work wasn't only for the elite. Anyone could cultivate it. A software engineer could block out hours to write better code. A student could eliminate notifications and study with clarity. An entrepreneur could disconnect to build business models that actually worked. Deep work democratized excellence. Newport pointed to a hidden reality. Most people spend their days in a state of semi-distraction. They check emails every few minutes. They switch tasks constantly. They attend meetings that lack purpose. They go home feeling tired but unsure what they accomplished. Shallow work had become the default. But shallow work, though necessary at times, offered limited value. It was logistical. It was reactive. It was replaceable. Deep work, on the other hand, created breakthroughs. It demanded full engagement. It stretched the mind, and it left behind results that mattered. To transition from shallow to deep, one needed to start with clarity. Newport introduced the idea of attention residue. He explained that when people switch from one task to another, part of their attention stays stuck on the previous task. This residue slows down thinking. It reduces efficiency. So if someone jumped between emails and writing a report, their cognitive performance dropped. Even a quick glance at a message left behind residue. To truly focus, one had to avoid context switching. This meant dedicating blocks of time to one task, and one task only. It also meant scheduling shallow work so it didn't bleed into the rest of the day. Email could be batch processed. Meetings could be grouped together. Social media could be time-boxed or avoided altogether. Newport also encouraged tracking deep work. By measuring the hours spent in true concentration, individuals could build awareness. They could see progress. They could identify patterns and refine their schedules. Just like physical fitness required tracking workouts, cognitive fitness required tracking focus. There was also the challenge of embracing boredom. In a world that offered instant entertainment, the mind grew impatient. People reached for phones at red lights, during elevator rides, even in the bathroom. This constant stimulation weakened the brain's ability to go deep. Newport advised practicing boredom. Instead of filling every gap with content, one should allow the mind to be still. This strengthened concentration. It trained the brain to resist distraction. He called this the training of deep work. It wasn't just about removing distractions. It was about conditioning the mind. Another enemy of depth was the internet. More specifically, social media. Platforms were designed to capture attention, not encourage excellence. People justified their use with vague terms like networking or exposure, but Newport challenged this. He proposed a craftsman approach to tool selection. Instead of adopting every new app, individuals should ask a simple question. Does this tool significantly support something I deeply value? If the answer was no, it should be eliminated. He wasn't against technology. He was against unthinking adoption. Depth required intention, and intention demanded discernment. The average knowledge worker faced an inbox filled with demands. Each message pulled them away from deep thought. Newport introduced the idea of a work shutdown ritual. At the end of the workday, one would review unfinished tasks, plan the next day, and declare work closed. This psychological closure allowed the mind to rest. It prevented burnout. It respected boundaries. He argued that deep work also required rest. Sleep, breaks, and downtime weren't luxuries. They were necessities. The brain needed silence to consolidate learning. Rest wasn't the opposite of work.
It was part of it. The journey to deep work was not a one-time decision. It was a daily practice. It was built in hours, habits, and small choices. It meant saying no to many things, but it also meant saying yes to excellence, yes to meaning, yes to work that left a mark. Newport concluded that those who embraced deep work would rise above. They would master hard skills faster. They would produce better results. They would find satisfaction in craftsmanship. And in a noisy world, their focus would be their superpower. As the modern world marched forward at breakneck speed, the demands on attention only intensified. People were expected to stay connected, respond quickly, stay current, and keep up with a fire hose of information. But this very urgency, Cal Newport argued, was leading to mediocrity. The highest levels of productivity and creativity, he believed, came not from more inputs, but from fewer. It came from subtraction. It came from focus. In this pursuit, the principle of working deeply had to become more than a concept. It had to become a discipline. And discipline, Newport explained, meant structure. The human brain was not naturally wired for deep focus in the face of constant novelty. It needed help. It needed scaffolding. So he emphasized the power of routines, intentional blocks of time carved out for intense, undistracted work. When deep work was treated like a meeting with oneself, honored with the same respect as an appointment, it became a sacred window. Newport suggested starting small. Even 90 minutes of deep focus could yield more than an entire day of multitasking. The key was consistency. He recommended choosing a time, a place, and a specific task. No open-ended wandering, no vague, "I'll try to focus later." It had to be planned. This planning phase extended to how one viewed the work itself. Newport spoke of embracing the discomfort that often came with deep work. It wasn't always pleasurable. In fact, deep work could be exhausting, but it was fulfilling. It created forward movement. It brought a sense of completion. It also sharpened the mind. Neuroscience backed this up. When the brain focused deeply, it formed richer myelin around neurons. This biological insulation improved mental sharpness. It made future deep work easier and more effective. So every minute spent in focus was also an investment in the mind's future performance. But the culture resisted this truth. People were rewarded for appearing busy. They were applauded for being available. They were told to collaborate endlessly, brainstorm in groups, and be team players. But Newport challenged this cultural current. He proposed a thought experiment. What if the most valuable contributions didn't come from endless collaboration, but from solitary depth? What if the breakthroughs came not from the meeting room, but from the quiet hours before anyone arrived? He pointed to historical examples. Isaac Newton didn't discover calculus in a workshop. He did it during his retreat from Cambridge. Mark Twain wrote in a secluded shed on the family property. Steve Jobs would take long walks in silence, solving complex problems away from the desk. These stories weren't romantic myths. They were proof that solitude, when used intentionally, was fertile ground for brilliance. Newport urged readers to rethink their relationship with solitude. Instead of something to avoid, solitude should be cultivated. It should be integrated. He called this productive meditation, the act of focusing the mind on a single problem while doing something physically undemanding, like walking or showering. This allowed ideas to bloom without distraction. It trained the brain to sustain attention without external stimulation. As people practiced this, they began to notice a shift. They felt more clarity. They felt more control. They felt more alive in their work. But Newport also warned of the enemies within. Distractions were not always external. Many were self-imposed. Procrastination, for example, often masqueraded as productivity. People checked emails, tweaked slides, reorganized files, anything to avoid real work. Newport called these activities pseudo-work. They gave the illusion of progress without substance. To escape this trap, he recommended a technique called time blocking. Each hour of the day was assigned a specific task or purpose. There was no room for drift. Every minute had a job. At first, this level of structure felt rigid, but in practice, it created freedom. It eliminated decision fatigue. It reduced stress. It gave every day a shape and a story. He reminded that even breaks should be scheduled. Rest was not wasted time. it was renewal. But unscheduled breaks led to interruptions. They opened the door to distractions. By controlling the schedule, one could control the focus. Still, not all tasks required deep work. Newport acknowledged the role of shallow work: administrative duties, logistical planning, coordination. These tasks, while not cognitively demanding, were often unavoidable. The solution was not to eliminate shallow work, but to contain it. He suggested scheduling shallow work in batches, replying to emails at fixed times, stacking administrative tasks into one block, and refusing to let shallow work seep into deep work hours. This boundary, though artificial at first, became a habit. Over time, it created a rhythm that protected mental energy. But the real transformation happened when people began to value depth over accessibility. Newport challenged the default mindset of being always available. He suggested setting expectations with colleagues, letting them know one's focus hours, creating a culture where deep work was respected, not interrupted. In many cases, people feared backlash. They worried that saying no would hurt relationships. But Newport offered a different perspective. By producing better results, faster and more reliably, one earned trust. Depth led to mastery, and mastery created leverage. He told the story of Nate Silver, the political statistician. Silver became a household name, not by tweeting constantly, but by diving deep into data. His website became a go-to source because of the quality of his analysis, not the frequency of his updates. Another example was David Heinemeier Hansson, creator of Ruby on Rails. He deliberately avoided meetings, email chains, and distractions. Instead, he focused on building tools and writing clearly. His impact came from depth, not noise. These individuals weren't exceptions. They were models. They proved that deep work was not a luxury. It was a strategy. Newport extended this idea to organizations. He criticized open office plans, constant chat tools, and excessive meetings. He argued that these environments killed focus. They turned every day into a response loop. Instead, he proposed a culture of depth. Companies could designate focus hours. They could reward output, not activity. They could design workflows that protected attention. Some forward-thinking organizations had already adopted these principles. Software firms limited internal messaging to specific windows. Design studios scheduled silent mornings. Research labs built physical spaces for uninterrupted thinking. These environments weren't cold or rigid. They were fertile. They allowed creativity to flourish. They respected the human brain's limits. At the heart of Newport's message was a return to craftsmanship. In the rush to optimize everything, people had lost touch with the joy of making something well. Deep work brought that joy back. It reconnected people to their work. It gave their hours meaning. It made excellence visible. And in a world filled with content, it was quality that stood out. But Newport didn't just offer philosophy, he offered tactics. One such tactic was the shutdown ritual. At the end of each workday, one would take a few minutes to review tasks, plan tomorrow, and close the loop on open items. This ritual signaled the brain that the day was complete. It reduced anxiety. It allowed true rest in the evening. Another tactic was the 4DX framework, borrowed from organizational theory. It focused on 4 principles: focus on the wildly important, act on lead measures, keep a compelling scoreboard, and create a cadence of accountability. This framework translated deep work into action. It made goals visible. It turned intentions into results. Newport also introduced the idea of the lead measure, a behavior directly within one's control that predicted success. For deep work, this might be hours of uninterrupted focus. By tracking this, one could build momentum. The scoreboard kept motivation high. It made the abstract concrete. And accountability ensured follow-through. Together, these tools formed a system. They took the idea of deep work and made it daily, repeatable, sustainable. In the end, Newport acknowledged the paradox. The modern world offered infinite information. It rewarded reactivity. It idolized speed. But to rise above the noise, one had to slow down. One had to choose depth over distraction, meaning over motion, mastery over mediocrity. Deep work was not just a path to success, it was a path to satisfaction. It made work more than a chore. It made it an art, a craft, a legacy. As people embraced this way of working, they found themselves changed.
They were no longer pulled by every ping. They were no longer exhausted by shallow tasks. They were deliberate, they were present, and they were building something that mattered, not just for the world, but for themselves. In the stillness of deep focus, the human mind revealed its full potential. It was in these moments that people didn't just work, they created. They solved problems that had lingered for weeks. They developed ideas that changed conversations. They did more than check boxes. They pushed boundaries. Cal Newport understood that deep work was not just about productivity, it was about fulfillment. There was a difference between being busy and being effective, between activity and achievement. In a world flooded with motion, stillness became power. The digital revolution had changed how people interacted with work. Emails, instant messages, and social media made it seem like everything had to happen now.
There was pressure to reply, to react, to keep up.
One of Newport's most powerful insights was that deep work was not a talent, it was a habit. Like fitness, it required training. It required small, consistent effort over time, and the results compounded. He explained that attention span was like a muscle. When people allowed it to be pulled in 100 directions, it atrophied. But when they practiced focusing, even for a few minutes longer each day, it grew stronger. And soon, an hour of deep work became possible. Then 2, then more. It wasn't about overnight change, it was about momentum. Newport pointed to the research of Anders Ericsson, who studied deliberate practice. Ericsson showed that world-class performers in any domain, chess, music, athletics, achieved mastery through focused, intentional effort. They didn't practice more, they practiced better. They trained in depth, they embraced discomfort, and they improved with precision. This principle applied directly to knowledge work. If someone spent 4 hours writing code with intense focus, they produced more and learned faster than someone who spread those hours across an entire distracted day. Depth created speed. Depth created skill. To build a life of deep work, Newport suggested rethinking leisure as well. He noted that many people spent their free time in low-quality activities, mindless scrolling, passive entertainment, endless news consumption. These habits didn't renew the mind. They cluttered it. He recommended high-quality leisure, activities that brought satisfaction, restoration, or learning. Reading books, practicing a craft, engaging in challenging hobbies, having meaningful conversations, taking long walks without devices. These pursuits filled the well, they replenished attention, they gave the mind the silence it needed to process the day. He introduced the idea of a deep life, a life organized around focus and intention. In this life, work and rest were balanced. Technology was used deliberately, and meaning was not something to be found, but something to be built, brick by brick, block by block, moment by moment. Newport described his own routines to illustrate this philosophy. He scheduled his day down to the half hour. He set rules for email. He avoided social media completely. He made space for reading and reflection. And yet, he was not rigid. He adjusted as needed. But the system served a purpose. It gave him clarity. It gave him freedom. It gave him results. The deep life, he explained, wasn't austere or joyless. It was rich, full, and deeply human. He acknowledged that building such a life wasn't easy. It required saying no. It required resisting cultural pressure. It required standing out. But the rewards made the struggle worthwhile. There was a cost to shallowness, stress, exhaustion, lack of fulfillment. Deep work was the remedy. It offered peace. It offered purpose. It offered excellence. Newport returned to the workplace recognizing that many professionals were caught in systems they didn't control. Open offices, constant meetings, unclear expectations. But even in these environments, he believed individuals could create space for depth. He advised negotiating deep work time with managers, demonstrating the results of focus, setting boundaries with respect and clarity, creating personal rituals within shared spaces. Even an hour of deep work each morning could transform output. He also suggested reimagining how teams worked. Instead of always collaborating in real time, teams could embrace asynchronous communication. This gave people time to think, to respond with depth, not haste, to offer better ideas, not just faster replies. He shared examples of companies that embraced this principle. Some used project management tools that reduced meetings. Others adopted makers' schedules, protecting mornings for creative work.
In every case, the result was higher quality, less stress, and more innovation. Newport also examined the myth of multitasking. He explained that the human brain was not capable of true multitasking. It could only switch rapidly between tasks. This switching came at a cost, cognitive residue. Each switch left a trail of mental clutter, and that clutter slowed thinking, increased errors, and reduced creativity. The solution? Monotasking, focusing on one task at a time, for longer, with more intensity. This was not a weakness, it was strength. It was how the mind did its best work. He illustrated this with the story of Adam Grant, a professor at the Wharton School. Grant was one of the most productive academics in his field, but he didn't work non-stop. He blocked large chunks of time for deep work. He disappeared from meetings and email during these periods. He wasn't always visible, but his results spoke loudly. He published groundbreaking research. He wrote best-selling books. He made an impact because he went deep. Newport emphasized that anyone could do this. One didn't need to be a professor or a coder or a writer. Deep work applied to analysts, designers, marketers, students, and entrepreneurs. It applied to anyone who solved problems with their mind. It applied to anyone who created, learned, or led. And in a world flooded with noise, deep work became a competitive advantage. But more than that, it became a path to dignity, to self-respect, to pride in one's craft. Newport called on readers to treat their attention with reverence, to stop trading it for likes, clicks, and pings, to stop measuring themselves by the volume of their inbox. He reminded that the mind craved meaning. It didn't want to be distracted. It wanted to be engaged. It wanted to be stretched, used, challenged. Deep work offered that challenge, and with it, transformation. At the heart of Newport's message was a simple choice, a fork in the road. One path led to shallow busyness, to empty urgency, to days filled with noise and nights filled with fatigue. The other path led to focus, to clarity, to work that mattered. The choice wasn't easy, but it was clear. He left no doubt that the deep life was possible, that it was waiting, not in a far-off retreat, but in the next focused hour, the next blocked calendar, the next task done with full presence. It was not reserved for the few. It was available to all, but only to those willing to go deep. As the sun rose each day, people across the world opened their laptops, sat at desks, and prepared for another day of work. Some did it with dread, others with habit, but a few, a rare few, approached that moment with something different. They had carved out space, protected time. They stepped into their morning not with noise, but with purpose. They entered the world of deep work. For these individuals, the first hour was sacred. Their phones were far away. Notifications were silenced. Tabs were closed. They didn't start with inboxes. They started with intention. They opened their notebooks, code editors, design tools, or research documents, and began. One clear task, one focused effort. Their minds sharpened with each passing minute. This wasn't by chance. It was by design. They had chosen to operate differently. They had chosen to think deeply. And in doing so, they were creating something that most people never experienced: true progress. Cal Newport had spent years observing this transformation. He watched how professionals who practiced deep work didn't just get more done, they grew. Their confidence expanded. Their clarity returned. They felt control over their time. They found satisfaction in their results. They began to love their work again, not because it was easy, but because it mattered. In a sea of distractions, they had found the anchor of focus, The shift wasn't always dramatic. It began with small decisions, turning off email during key hours, reading instead of scrolling, scheduling the most demanding tasks for the morning, protecting 2 hours a day like they were guarding a treasure. And, in a way, they were. Newport explained that deep work created artifacts. Whether it was a published article, a finished project, a coded feature, or a strategic plan, deep work left something behind, something real, tangible, meaningful. Unlike shallow work, which dissolved into digital ether, deep work left a trail, a record, a legacy. These artifacts became the stepping stones of mastery. They built careers, they changed companies, they enriched lives. As people committed to deep work, they also changed how they saw the world. They no longer chased every shiny app or tool. They became selective, minimalist. They realized that more tools didn't mean better work. Better work came from better focus. They built environments that supported their goals. Some redesigned their home offices to reduce clutter. Others used noise-canceling headphones or worked in libraries. Some blocked entire days each week for creative work. The details varied, but the principle was the same. Engineer your space to support your depth. Newport stressed that identity played a role. People who saw themselves as deep workers behaved accordingly. They didn't brag about being busy. They didn't apologize for focus. They took pride in attention. And over time, that identity became part of their professional DNA. They were the ones who delivered, who solved the hard problems, who could be trusted to create from scratch. And others noticed. Newport also spoke about the legacy of work. He believed that deep work was not just a skill for productivity, it was an ethic, a value, a way of respecting one's time and potential. When people gave their full mind to a task, they honored that task. They brought dignity to their labor. They showed up for themselves. And this ethic was contagious. Teams built around deep work became higher performing. They respected each other's time. They minimized interruptions. They praised results, not responsiveness. They collaborated with purpose, not noise. They built things that lasted. Newport believed that the deep work philosophy could shape not just individual careers, but entire cultures. He imagined schools teaching students how to focus before teaching them how to use devices. He imagined companies giving employees quiet time instead of more meetings. He imagined families putting away screens to be truly present with each other. This wasn't nostalgia, it was vision. It was a call to reclaim the power of attention, to remind people that their minds were built for more than reaction. They were built for reflection, creation, insight. And the first step was always the same: reduce the noise, go deep. Newport also warned against waiting for perfect conditions. There would always be emails to answer, always a project looming, always some digital temptation. Waiting for silence was a trap. Instead, he encouraged building depth into real life, finding 30 minutes here, 90 minutes there, and gradually expanding. He reminded that even a single hour of deep work each day added up. In a month, it became 20 to 30 hours. In a year, it became hundreds. And those hours could produce books, businesses, art, and breakthroughs. They could change lives. He challenged the myth that only a few people were capable of extraordinary things. He argued that extraordinary results came from ordinary people doing focused work, consistently, over time. Deep work was not elitist. It was empowering. It gave anyone from any background the chance to rise, to stand out, to matter. Newport closed his philosophy with an invitation, not a demand, not a command, but an invitation to live better, to think better, to work better, to become a craftsman in one's field. Not because it was easy, but because it was worth it. He reminded that a life filled with distraction was easy to fall into, but it left people tired, scattered, and unfulfilled. A life built on depth, though harder to build, brought clarity. It brought pride. It brought peace. And ultimately, it brought results that could not be faked. They had weight. They had value. They were unmistakably real. As the world continued to evolve, with faster technology and louder platforms, the choice became even more urgent. Would people follow the current? Or would they step aside? Would they consume endlessly? Or would they create? Would they skim? Or would they dive? The path of deep work wasn't a secret. It was just difficult, but it was open. Open to the writer with a dream, the engineer with a vision, the student with ambition, the leader with a mission. Open to anyone willing to claim their time, to claim their attention, to go deep, and in that depth, find not just productivity, but power, not just output, but meaning, not just work, but legacy. In the age of noise, those who master focus will shape the future. Deep work isn't just a method, it's a mindset, a movement, a way to reclaim your time and unlock your true potential. If you're ready to rise above the shallow and build a life of purpose and excellence, your journey starts now. Subscribe to Thinknova, where deep minds come to grow. Stay focused, stay powerful, stay you. But Newport saw through the illusion. He realized that this always-on mindset scattered attention and drained energy. He argued that success in the knowledge economy didn't come from being the most connected. It came from being the most focused. To live this truth, people had to be intentional about how they worked and how they lived. Newport urged professionals to view their attention as capital, something to be invested wisely. Every decision, every click, every shift in focus carried a cost. He introduced the concept of attention selection. Not everything deserved attention. Not every notification deserved a response. Attention was not infinite. It had to be protected, guarded like a resource. He advised building attention selection into everyday decisions. Before checking a platform or replying to a message, one should ask, does this align with what truly matters? If not, it could wait or be ignored.